Okay, great, thank you. You can hear me okay? Yeah. Okay, thanks, Alice. The UK Web Archive serves as an essential repository of digital information, preserving a vast array of web content for the benefit of society. However, with the increased availability of this content, there arises a pressing need to address distressing, discriminatory, harmful content that may be encountered by the end users. The question of content warnings in the context of the UK Web Archive was first raised in March 2020, and two risks related to offensive language and offensive content were identified and added to our risk register. The suggested mitigation was to display some form of advisory message for the user interface. However, at that time, the subgroup found no appropriate place for such a message and opted to monitor reader responses instead. In September 2021, we founded a harmful content group which evolved more into a content advisories group in which we re-evaluated the risks and mitigations in light of several factors, including user and curator feedback, recent takedown requests, workshops addressing issues of inclusive language in describing collections. And the project concluded in September 2023 when we finalised and signed off the recommendations of the group and the future steps were agreed. The objectives of the work were as follows. The use of content advisories for the user interface and how this impacts the search and discovery experience for the users, the risks and issues of implementing the content warnings in the first place, a review of good practice and seeing how other archives and GLAM organisations manage issues of description and presentation of archived web content and collections, seeking to identify best practices, and engagement with other work in the fields, such as that carried out by the Archive of Tomorrow project and the BL Anti-Racism Cataloguing project. Also, identifying requirements for future work which could be carried out to address potentially harmful content in the wider context of the legal deposit library work, which would necessitate additional resources and expertise. So, out of scope for our project was building or implementing a taxonomy or glossary from scratch, whilst acknowledging that we need a glossary to refer to when reviewing and revising descriptive metadata. We are not about censorship or suppression of content, and we weren't covering takedown of content which is handled under other processes, for example, illegal content such as that covered by data protection infringements. As part of our review, we considered using an automated language checking as seen by examples used in the Qatar National Library and also the National Library of New Zealand. However, it's unlikely that the UK libraries had the resources to implement this, and so the recommendation is that we kept a watching brief on this work. In the UK Web Archive, we trialled an automated process to pick up from our website descriptions potentially harmful words which had been included in the glossary by Carissa Chu. But in practice, this was found to be impractical for us because it brought up a lot of false positives, and it demonstrated to us that the context is so important. It's not just enough to have a list of stop words or potentially harmful words. So, as part of our research, we looked to other projects, for example, the Archive of Tomorrow project. This project conducted research into best practice in the content advisories and drew a lot on the this collection focuses on health-related information and misinformation, including personal health resources and online communities, discussing particular health concerns and identities. One of the challenges for this project was to what extent such inaccurate, refuted or dangerous content be flagged in the interface? And how do they make content available responsibly without inserting our perspectives into the debates? And the proposed interventions for this project were: at the institutional level, implement a harmful language statement. At the sub-collection level, incorporate short general statements into bibliographic records for UK Web Archive target records, advising users to take care when using particular resources where there is a greater likelihood of encountering material which is concerning living individuals, outdated or offensive language, or otherwise sensitive material. But also, what came out of this project was a principle to steer clear of labelling content as misinformation, because you can see that that's a real minefield. We talked to Gale Primary Sources about their Content Advisories project, which focuses on their digital primary sources collections in educational settings. For collections that contain sensitive or controversial content, dedicated advisory statements tailored to specific context, such as collections about political extremism or archives concerning marginalised communities, are implemented. And this allows the users to understand the specific nature of the content that they might encounter and prepares them appropriately. And something else that we took from this work was that it's important to maintain a balance between warning about potentially harmful content and then not implying that certain topics, for example, those relevant to the LGBTQ community or other marginalised groups, are inherently harmful. And this balance is crucial to support diversity and ensure inclusivity without stigmatising specific communities. As part of our review, we came across many examples of content advisories from other GLAM organisations. For example, the V&A's implementation of content advisory thumbnails in collections containing offensive language or other potentially harmful content. So you can see that you've got a warning message before the user proceeds to view the content. And the Digital Repository of Ireland's ethics protocol and associated outputs of its Archiving the Eighth, Archiving Reproductive Health projects. This project also provided care guidelines for staff who are working on the collection and could be distressed by the content that they encounter. So all of these are useful approaches, but they don't align with our web archives size or complexity, or address problems with multiple points of entry, as is in the case of the UK Web Archive. So this slide is to illustrate that there are lots of different access routes into the UK Web Archive, and so the project considered where and at what level it would be best to place content advisories. We considered different options, for example, in the MARC record or specifically in the 500 field. This allows for standardised metadata inclusion, providing information about potentially harmful content. However, it might not be prominent enough in the catalogue, potentially leading to lower visibility. And there are two examples on the screen here of catalogue records, one from the National Library of Scotland and one from the Bishopgate Institute and the National Archives. Requiring users to acknowledge terms and conditions before accessing the archive would provide a centralised location for content advisories. However, this would be too general to be useful and might present barriers to access, reducing user engagement. The terms and conditions page is important, as anybody can search the UK Web Archive, including people under 18 years of age. Currently, most of our Web Archive content is only available in reading rooms. However, in some future optimistic world, we might be able to make a larger proportion of this content more widely available. So we need to consider that at this stage. And in addition, placing information on the Wayback banner, which we use across our archive, would be a good place to put information. However, this would need significant technical development and changes to our interface. So, adding content advisories to individually selected websites or targets would provide a good deal of information for the user, but again, to implement this would take significant development, and target level descriptions or website level descriptions are not currently visible in the user interface. It would also be extremely challenging to add content warnings retrospectively to existing content, and it could never be comprehensive. And this also raises challenging conversations about editorial judgments about individual websites. So if us as curators are placing content level advisories, we're kind of placing our own opinions to a large degree on these target records. So implementing content advisories at a collection level strikes a balance between being specific enough to be useful and not requiring content advisories at the resource or website level. And this helps users to understand the nature of a collection without attaching a value judgment to individual resources. And we're coming on to the recommended actions of the project. So, resource allocation for reviewing descriptions and adding advisories will be essential. Initial focus should be on potentially sensitive collections, by which we mean, for example, bodily autonomy collection, which contains reproductive health, or those collections which talk about marginalised communities. And this work has already begun. So we've got advisors who are helping us review our Black and Asian Britain collections. The review will need to be continuous to address changing language and ensure inclusivity, and descriptions should focus on factual statements and avoid making value judgments. Merely stating that content is distressing is insufficient. Specifics must be provided to allow users to make informed choices. And there is a risk that dedicating too much resource to content advisories or content warnings might escalate, and this would take away resource from our other necessary work. For example, our achievement of our broader EDI goals. So building more inclusive collections and engaging with communities enables us to build more inclusive collections. It informs our collection practices. It's crucial for ensuring that our collections are inclusive and that the terminology we use in descriptions and metadata is informative and respectful, addressing potential concerns that could arise within communities. So we will continue to work with our community partners. For example, we've got an Southeast Asia UK project. Tools such as the Inclusive Terminology Glossary, which had been initiated by Carissa Chu. This can be useful to identify and address harmful language and to formulate our inclusive descriptions, and also to surface materials about underrepresented peoples and histories. I'm concluding now to say that this presentation has provided an overview of our ongoing efforts to enhance accessibility and ethical management of archived web content through a strategic policy initiative and collaborative practices. Key to our approach has been a robust content advisory framework which informs and protects users while preserves the integrity and inclusivity of the archived materials. So going forward, we will focus on reviewing and refining these advisory practices. We'll be working with other groups internally to the libraries, for example, the Inclusive Descriptions Community of Practice, the Legal Deposit User Forum, the BL Anti-Racism Project, and we'll be looking to our community as well, who have been extremely helpful in this work. Thanks, everybody.